Everyone watching this video someday will die. This, unfortunately, is a fact of life. From those born into a life of poverty to heirs to multi-billion-dollar fortunes, the end is always the same. The question therefore is, how do you continue with destiny hanging over yourself? Some develop feelings of nihilism, the world is meaningless. This can have both a negative and positive impact. Generally, most just preoccupy themselves with their daily life or try to make each day special, knowing tomorrow is not guaranteed. But thought often turns to how we will be perceived by those left behind. When we are gone, how far into the future will we be remembered? For most people, it may be your grandchildren tell their grandchildren about you. Any further than that, your name generally becomes one of the many inscribed to the countless tombstones in the cemeteries around the world. Seen, but not known. For some ambitious people, however, this isn't enough. They want to be remembered long after they are buried. They want their name to invoke something in the reader. They want to build a legacy. Fittingly, our story begins in Detroit, Michigan, United States of America. January 6, 1925, Zachary and Catherine DeLorean, immigrants chasing the American dream, have a son who they named John Zachary DeLorean. The father had worked as a union organiser for the Ford Motor Company, but his poor English limited his promotion opportunities. His mother worked for a subdivision for General Electric. The relationship between his parents was often problematic, with Catherine filing for divorce in 1942. To get away from his father, John spent a large amount of time in California, to the point it became a second home to him. From a young age, as expected given the environment he was raised in, John took an interest in cars. Known as Motown or Motor City, the Detroit metro area is home to the three big companies in American automobile manufacturing: Ford, Chrysler, and General Motors, or GM for short. GM owns several recognizable American motor brands such as Buick, Chevrolet, Cadillac, Pontiac, and the more truck-focused GMC. Since the 1960s, General Motors had around 45 to 50% market share within the United States across its range of cars. Pretty much every other car sold in America in the 1960s was a GM model. So the destination for young DeLorean was obvious, but first he needed to stop being a child. Due to the poor standards of education in California at the time compared to Detroit, when he returned to Michigan he was behind his peers. He credits this with creating a strong work ethic within him. After failing his Be a Child Forever exam, he grew up and went to college. He began attending the Lawrence Technological Institute near Detroit, but his studies were interrupted by the Second World War.
What's that?
War were declared.
He served in the army for 3 years without being deployed overseas. Upon his return, he found his family living in economic hardship, so would need to work to support his studies and help out at home. He worked odd jobs to pay his way back into Lawrence, including directing a dance band from 8 PM to 2 AM, which he claims taught him to live on 5 hours sleep, a habit he continued long into the future. During the summers, he got bits of engineering experience working at the Chrysler assembly plant. One of his class assignments was to perform what's known as a time and motion study. These are severely unpopular amongst workers, and the response from his test subjects put him off the field, despite completing his bachelor's in mechanical engineering. This disheartened John, who at this point considered himself shy and introverted. He knew whatever field he entered long term, he needed to overcome these self-limitations. So he invented exposure therapy in the 1950s, working as an insurance salesman who went door to door honing his charisma. Once his confidence was up, he realised he did want to be an engineer after all. He would later join the Chrysler Institute, completing a master's in automotive engineering, before getting a graduate role there. However, he found the work at Chrysler too narrow, but the company too large for him. To really bloom, he needed to take a step back, to take 2 steps forward. In 1953, he chose to join Packard, a company outside of the Big Three. The upmarket car manufacturer meant DeLorean had to think outside of the box to compete. He was involved in the development of the Ultramatic transmission, one of the few automatics made by smaller companies at the time. This drive to succeed and an eye on the future saw him appointed head of research and development within 4 years. He would later earn an MBA through night school credits in 1957. However, Packard was soon to merge with Studebaker. Both firms were struggling financially, and John knew this was a short-term solution. He needed to get out. He had two options: R&D director for a small auto parts firm where he knew everyone and could make a big difference, getting involved in all aspects such as finance, marketing and manufacturing, like he had enjoyed great success at Packard. Or the big one: a job in the newly established Advanced Engineering Division at Pontiac. After some thought, DeLorean was a here we go to General Motors. He was given the role of assistant to Pontiac General Manager Simon Bunky Knudsen, the son of former GM President William Knudsen. In 1959, another young engineer by the name of Bill Collins joined and would work closely with DeLorean for decades. Collins would say later, "I was the guy who took his ideas and made them work," but more on Collins later. Bunky and DeLorean got on extremely well. They seemed to have similar opinions about what sold cars. Both bought into a famous quote: "You can't sell an old man's car to a young man, but you can sell a young man's car to an old man." Now, how do you make a car for the young man in the pre-digital age? Easy. It's a foolproof method that has lasted throughout the generations. Make it fast. What's the simplest way to make it fast? Stick a larger engine in a small car. This is common practice now, but at the time there was an unwritten rule that no GM car could have an engine bigger than 330 cubic inches. DeLorean, with permission from his boss, ignored this and stuck a 389 cubic inch V8 into the Pontiac Le Mans to create the Pontiac GTO. This was GM's first entry into the muscle car market, one characterised by big engines creating high straight line performance at rock bottom prices. Basically, what a young man looks for in a car. After a few styling and engineering tweaks, the car was ready to be advertised along Tigers. One advert famously read, "Get one before you're too old to understand." Targeted sales were set at 5,000 units. They reached that before GM bosses discovered the smuggled rocket DeLorean had left in the trunk. In the end, the car sold over 32,000 units. The GTO is affectionately known as the GOAT amongst fans, and is believed to be either the first true muscle car, or at least the model which popularised them. With that, John had officially made it. He had his breakout production. From there, the only way was up. He had become a star within GM, with hints of not following the rules. He followed the GTO's success with the Grand Prix, and by 1968, Pontiac was the third biggest car brand from Detroit.
Right now, why not break away? Break away in a Firebird. Break away in a Grand Prix. Break away in a GTO. Break away in a White Dragon Pontiac. 'Cause the White Dragon Pontiac is the breakaway car this year. Pontiac, get a White Pontiac, get a White Dragon Pontiac, it's the breakaway car this year.
Whilst playing golf in 1969, he got a call from his boss, essentially telling him he was the new general manager of the #1 car brand from Detroit, Chevrolet. At 44, he was the youngest division head in GM history. Naturally, those above were tipping him to one day take over the top job. But first, he had to shake up Chevy. This would not be as simple as Pontiac. At the time, Pontiac was struggling but didn't really have a set identity, so they were free to send it down the muscle car direction with the GTO. Chevy was different, as they sold an eclectic range of vehicles. A few examples of different ones with the Chevrolet badge sold in the 1960s are being shown on screen. Additionally, Chevrolet's reputation was low in the aftermath of the publication of Ralph Nader's Dangerous at Any Speed book, which was heavily critical of the Chevrolet Corvaire's safety. You can't solve the issue without first identifying it, so DeLorean went on a tour of the company interviewing everyone he could find to get first-hand info about the company's failings. His conclusions were that the company was fine, apart from issues with profit, market penetration, product, dealer profit, finance and organisation. His solutions were numerous, including the reduction in layers and age of management, de-emphasising regional marketing power, introducing project managers of each individual motor, streamlined vehicle combinations, disciplined staff on budgeting, introduction of a computer system, introduction of a planning committee involving all groups, and ensure quality reports went to him rather than someone in manufacturing. The results were that, in his 4 years in charge of Chevy, quality improved 66%, across all brands, warranty costs went from the second highest to the lowest, reductions in labour led to a $14.1 million saving, and net dealer profits hit all-time highs in 1972 of $424 million. However, if the environment at Pontiac allowed John to run free, the environment at Chevy put him on a leash. Throughout his time at GM, John had always thought the future was smaller cars. In the late 1960s, he pushed the company to focus on smaller cars, to capitalise on the success of the European Volkswagen Beetle. This went against the company's philosophy that Americans wanted to trade up to a bigger and therefore better car every few years, a capitalistic view. However, GM was so large that they were slow to adapt to the changing market. This also meant that any long-term quality concerns John had could be ignored as the company still made profit and Americans didn't have many foreign alternatives in the 1960s. Eventually, this all sense. Unfortunately, the way the Chevrolet small car was created wasn't ideal. In October 1968, GM chairman James M. Roach told an audience that Chevrolet would introduce a subcompact car in 2 years. The only problem with this was that this was also news to those in Chevrolet. Thankfully, it was also news to Ford, who quickly responded with the Pinto, a car which famously burst into flames when rear-ended. This should have been a slam dunk for GM, but the car produced is the definition of a camel is a horse designed by a committee. The car would be known as the Vega, a name at the bottom of the list which included Gemini. GMini. The car was seemingly being announced and design dictated by upper management. After a prototype was created, the test run lasted for 8 miles before the front of the car broke off. To fix this, the front was strengthened, the first of many instances where the small car got heavier. By the time John was installed as head of Chevy, the car's weight and budget were running away from them. The division was also disillusioned with the model, as they had previously made a small car prototype they believed was better than the one corporate was forcing them to make. DeLorean managed to motivate the staff to work together, and eventually the finished product was as good as it was going to get with extensive quality checks installed. Now it was up to marketing to sell it. The issue is that the car was now heavier, bigger, and more expensive than its competitors. It was decided it would be sold as a premium car. Despite having approval for minor premium details, those on the pricing committee kept the same selling price of $2,091, but removed things like the larger wheels to save $3 per car. The Vega would end up costing $172 and $311 more than the Ford Pinto and VW Beetle respectively, and weighed more than 170 kilograms more than the German. By the nature of the brief, the car was a failure. DeLorean was a proud man. He would defend his and his employees' work until his last breath, but he was not fooling himself. He told the press that the car was in the ballpark of what Roach had envisioned, to which a journalist sharply responded, "Would your boss accept a ballpark estimate of your anticipated expense budget at Chevrolet for the next year that was plus or minus 25%? John's inner conscience knew they were right. Despite all the quality checks that went in, 132,000 Vegas would have to be recalled for defective carburetors, which had the potential to cause fires. In 1972, DeLorean was promoted further to be a group executive in charge of domestic car and truck groups. He would be working alongside the other senior management staff, notably on the 14th floor of the old GM head office in Detroit City Center, now known as Cadillac Place. In just 17 years at GM, he had done what many had failed to achieve in 40. You might think this is great for DeLorean, a promotion with, assumably, more control to shape GM in his vision. However, the move to the 14th is widely believed to have been a mistake. Life on the 14th floor soon was mundane. On his second day there, DeLorean was reportedly told by his boss that, "I want you to disappear into the wallpaper up here. I don't want to see you in the newspaper." This would lead to a personality clash. John was not someone who would blend in. This was a larger-than-life partying man who made his name for himself launching exciting cars aimed at young people. He was not someone who would act or look like everyone else. By 1968, he'd undergone a facelift, was into fitness, and had started to dye his hair to improve his image. He had investments in the New York Yankees and San Diego Chargers MLB and NFL teams respectively. He was an outgoing man, friends with the movers and shakers of the time, such as James T. Aubrey, president of MGM Pictures, who introduced him to Sammy Davis Jr. and Johnny Carson. He was even seen with O.J. Simpson. These social skills also transferred to the ladies. His black book up to 1973 included former wives Kelly Harmon and Elizabeth Higgins, former girlfriend Jeannie Bell, and a list of reported encounters including Rachel Welch, Ursula Andress, Nancy Sinatra, Candice Bergen, and Pamela Austin. This was not an athlete, model, or Hollywood actor. This guy was an engineer for a car company, albeit a successful and presumably wealthy one. Whilst on a jet, he laid eyes on Christina Ferrer, a model in a copy of Vogue he'd been reading. At the time, they were both going through a divorce. Their shared lawyer set up the meeting between the two, but there was a problem. She was reportedly seeing Fletcher Jones, an acquaintance of DeLorean. Lucky for the DeLorean, Fletcher died in a plane crash in November 1972, which probably had nothing to do with John. Unless DeLorean did the right thing and honoured his friend by staying away from her for about a month or two, before they began dating and subsequently got married in 1973. It seemed there was no stopping John, living the high life, dead friend's widow as a wife, and rapidly climbing the slippery pole to eventually become the general manager of General Motors. That was until a press release dropped in 1973. DeLorean was to retire from General Motors. This was a shock to outsiders. A man predestined for the top, leaving the company he had given his best years of his life to. The public wanted to know why. To this day, General Motors has never officially commented on the reason DeLorean left the company. All we know is that GM treated the situation like DeLorean was retiring. You'd imagine John would be similarly measured when discussing the company that made him a multi-millionaire, with a simple and mature acknowledgement like "thank you for the opportunity and wish you all the best for the future." DeLorean did not do that. In February 1974, he approached author Patrick Wright to help him write a no-nonsense, no-bullshit book on his experience and views he gained during his time at GM. By Labor Day 1975, the book was ready and Playboy offered to publish it. At this point, DeLorean began a 4-year cycle of oscillating between "let's get the book out ASAP" to "let's not anger GM as they would interfere with future endeavours." This continued until Wright decided to publish the book of his own accord. The book lays out several reasons why John had chosen to leave GM. These seem to have hit critical levels when he moved to GM's infamous 14th floor. As previously mentioned, up there, any sense of individuality and free expression is quickly knocked out of upper managers. Meetings went from explorative discussions to fawning sessions to gain favour with superiors. Everyone there was a long-term GM employee who all believed in the GM way, and knew the only way up the corporate ladder was to butter up superiors. Innovation was saved for only the top-end models, leaving ordinary consumers in a cycle of debt and planned obsolescence. But the issue was, despite all the problems in GM, they were still successful. The company had become so large that they were effectively price setters in the market, and sold adequate amounts, even though Ford and Chrysler, arguably, had better products. You'd think now John was amongst the top brass, he could steer the ship to match his own vision for the brand. But this wasn't possible. DeLorean felt GM was transitioning away from operations-based executives, such as himself, who knew what it was like working the shop floor, to more ones only concerned with the numbers on the end-of-year reports. John's ability to make a difference, and be different, were diminishing by the day. The tension continued to rise between DeLorean and GM as quickly as he rose a slippery pole. Now, to be fair, John may not have helped himself at times. Whilst at Chevy, GM investigated him for taking kickbacks from part suppliers. Despite this, they still promoted him. GM were fine with him not following dress code, skipping fawning cocktail work dues, and even taking backhanders from suppliers. However, there seemed to be one boundary that no one, not even the chosen one, could cross. You could not publicly slate the company. As part of his role on the 14th floor, DeLorean was invited to and asked to prepare a speech for the GM management meeting at the Greenbrier Hotel, West Virginia. As a group executive, he was given the topic of product quality. A man on a salary of $650,000 essentially had homework which needed to be drafted and corrected by higher-ups to meet the tone of the other speeches and overall business ethos. DeLorean was not complimentary to GM's product quality. He wrote GM product quality was falling. This led to both customer dissatisfaction as well as $500 million warranty bill. He believed there was a culture of planned obsolescence where the current model would last just long enough for you to be ready to buy next year's model. This was believed to be an early draft which was later dramatically altered. The document was supposed to be top secret, with only DeLorean, PR staff and top management having access. Despite this, the speech ended up in the hands of journalists at Detroit News. John claimed later that a private investigator tracked the leak to the PR staff, but also claimed someone in GM was out to get him. There's also fears that John may have leaked it himself to get out easier. Regardless of the source, there was no coming back from the Greenbrier affair. In April 1973, General Motors announced John DeLorean's resignation, and in December 1979, Wright published DeLorean's book. Due to the aura of John and the groundbreaking nature of the view inside the largest car manufacturer in the world, the book sold 1.6 million copies. DeLorean did do one favour for GM. As he was resigning, he remembered he had made a report in secret about the state of the company, which he gave to chairman Dick Gerestenberg. His findings were that real problems exist within General Motors. Various levels of GM management are openly critical of one another. Our inability to compete with foreign manufacturers is more due to management failure than anything else, before listing a profit improvement plan which would save the firm $1.35 billion. He clearly subscribed to the old management adage of, "Don't come to me with problems, come to me with solutions." The point is, the thoughts of doing things differently to GM had been circling in his mind. In the epilogue of his book, he answers the question directly: what would you do if you were running General Motors? His answer to the question involves taking GM back to its roots, but he is also a great believer that larger companies should do more for the communities they sell in. The company should be for the consumer, selling cars to the highest standards which are built to last, and give those who've lost their way in society a chance to make a life for themselves through employment and training opportunities. Given his rebellious nature and his frustration at being a cog in the GM corporate machine, rumours had already begun to spread that he would start his own car company. But did John need to go again? At just 48 years old, DeLorean was expected to be content with his new life away from corporate. As part of the GM retirement package, John had his bonuses paid, was given the role of president of a charity, and the keys to a Cadillac dealership in Florida. He had the rest of his life ahead of him, with his family and cushy earnings to tide him over. Would you be satisfied by this? John clearly was not. This is a high-flying businessman who dates models, was the youngest division head in GM history, and parties 4 days a week. Having him retire at a Florida car dealership gives Napoleon to Corsica vibes. He likely would not sell for the comfort and modesty a life away from the spotlight would bring him. Plus, he had been high up on the inside of the largest car maker in the world. If anyone could go again, surely it was him. So he decided. Rather than the badge saying GMC, he wanted to say DMC. The DeLorean Motor Company was born. Being well known in the automotive industry, he was able to acquire finance through Bank of America loans, investment from car dealers, as well as from his friends Johnny Carson and Sammy Davis Jr. With a war chest behind him, he poached Bill Collins, made him chief engineer, and in 1975 set off with the aim of being the first man to disrupt the American auto industry since the 1920s. DeLorean was a smart man. He knew that GM's vast portfolio covered effectively every type of car imaginable. Any car GMC produced would be rivaled by John's former employer. So he chose to attack GM's weakest link, Corvette. Given this and everything we've learned about John up to this point, it's unsurprising he chose to build a sports car. But it wasn't to be a simple sports car, no. This was to be, in his words, an ethical sports car. The car would not be built with next year's replacement in mind, as it would not rust, a big issue at the time, and would have consumer safety at heart. The car would have crumple zones, airbags and anti-lock brakes, features expected today but 40 plus years ago were uncommon. To design the car, DeLorean called in Giorgetto Giugiaro of Ital Designs, a man who would later be hailed as the car designer of the 20th century. His CV was wide-ranging, designing cars such as the Lotus Esprit and the Volkswagen Golf, as well as service vehicles like buses and trucks. Alongside automobiles, he also designed cameras for Nikon and even firearms for Italian manufacturer Beretta. Essentially, if you wanted something designed, Giorgetto was your man. He used the plans he had previously drawn up for a prototype Porsche known as the Tapiro, a few touch-up, and the shell was done, complete with the iconic gull-wing doors. DeLorean then needed an engine for his sports car. Thankfully, he was already in the right place. So, whilst in Italy, he went to the Ferrari factory in Maranello. He went to reception to ask where the bus stop was before going to the airport to fly to France. Despite working with 6-litre V8 monsters in his time at GM, the engine chosen was a 2.6-litre V6, which was a collaboration between Peugeot, Renault and Volvo. This would, allegedly, give the car 160 horsepower, a 0-60 time of 8.5 seconds and a top speed of 130 miles per hour. Okay, I guess, we'll come back to that. To save weight, the car will be fitted with a revolutionary plastic chassis, which the company had patent pending. DeLorean and Colin continued to travel the world, getting parts together until, in 1977, they were ready to show the world their FU to GM. The car was unlike anything on the market. Known as a DMC-12 in production, the DeLorean was the culmination of John's efforts. A striking body made of rust-proof stainless steel and eye-catching gull-wing doors made the DMC-12 not look out of place in a sci-fi film. Compared to the boxy cars of the day, this looked like a single leap several decades into the future. The car made the front of press auto sections worldwide, and thousands of pre-orders came in. With the plans for the car of his dreams in hand, he just needed to turn the words, promises, and vision into actual product. He was after a factory where they could be mass produced. He scoured the world looking for somewhere to set up shop, sorting by desperation of local government. He originally looked in places like Spain and Puerto Rico, but soon a new location grabbed his attention, a place desperate for a win. A dream base to build a car of the future, in an area desperate to repair from the past. By the time our story intersects Belfast, the capital and largest city in Northern Ireland, it was going through arguably the worst period in its history. These were in the middle of a 30-year period of turmoil known today as the Troubles.
When threats became realities, when death itself became a cliché. The worst year of slaughter since the present emergency first spewed violence across the province 5 years ago. The death toll in Northern Ireland in 1972 reached 467, more than 3 times the total for the 3 preceding years put together. That statistic alone could be seen as the most significant illustration of how far Ulster has gone towards the precipice which so many have forecast is awaiting it. The prospect for 1973 seems bleak indeed.
The Troubles were a series of events that I really don't want to get into today, but for the sake of our story, the violence and turmoil in the area meant there was a lack of investment in Northern Ireland. Unemployment was around 11%, twice the UK average, and in particular, unemployment amongst Catholics in Belfast was around 50%. DeLorean smelt an opportunity. He knew of the large barriers to entries in the car industry. Even someone with his pedigree at the helm, he knew the odds were against DMC. But he also knew the British government were desperate for large businesses, which would bring much needed jobs, to relocate to Belfast and were willing to offer large subsidies to make this happen. So he made a pitch to the British government. For a bargain £84 million, he would set up a factory employing 2,000 people in just 18 months. A very ambitious timeline, given he was advised the project would take minimum 4 to 7 years. Desperate for a win, James Callaghan's Labour government took DeLorean up on his offer, gave him a cheque, and construction of the facility began in October 1978. Belfast did have engineering pedigree. Local company Harland & Wolff famously built the Titanic here, a ship which famously never had any problems whatsoever. The site chosen was in an area known as Dunmurry, around 7 miles south of Belfast city centre, on a piece of land which separated Catholic and Protestant neighbourhoods. With the plans and funding in hand, it was time to fine-tune the car and get it ready for mass production. DeLorean approached BMW and Porsche to help, but both said the project would take up to 4 times longer than promised to complete. Thankfully, one man did accept John's challenge. Team Lotus team principal and Lotus Cars founder, Colin Chapman. A visionary whose 7 F1 Constructors' Championships at the time could not be equalled by anyone, not even Enzo Ferrari. By 1978, however, Lotus was starting to fall on hard times financially. So the opportunity to work with their heavily government-backed DMC was an offer too good to turn down, especially after John and Colin came up with a unique payment structure using a company known as GPD, but more on that later. To make the car more mass production friendly, Lotus took most of the underwork they had done on these three and transferred it to the DMC-12. As the plans were fleshed out, a number of compromises were required, meaning that a lot of the aspects John aimed for, particularly some of the safety features and the ethical sports carness of the project, would have to be scrapped to meet the deadlines promised to the British government. The experimental plastic chassis was found to not be suitable after all and was removed for a steel backbone chassis. Another recommendation from the men from Norfolk to improve handling was to make the car mid-engined. However, John was firm the car would be rear-engined as he wanted the back seats to be big enough for golf clubs. Unfortunately, another compromise was the removal of Bill Collins from the project, ending the partnership which had brought DeLorean so much success. With the finer details all sorted, the car was ready for production. The Dunmurry factory opened in 1980.
John Zachary DeLorean is one of the biggest names in the car world. He was the youngest ever vice president of the giant General Motors company in Detroit before resigning several years ago in a series of personality and policy clashes. With his own personal fortune, he began a search for financial backing to fulfill his ambition of building his own cars in his own factory. His search ended here at Twinbrook Industrial Estate on the outskirts of Belfast.
The shiny new plant came with state-of-the-art technology like robots that moved the cars from one area to another. This would be needed as the site was split into several smaller buildings to minimise damage in case of an arson attack. Additional safety designs included a separate access road for Protestants so they could avoid the nearby Catholic Twinbrook estate. However, apart from protests at the ground-laying ceremony and a firebomb attack on the offices the night of Bobby Sands MP's death in 1981, the factory was generally well received by all those in the community as a place for creating much-needed jobs. These jobs were greeted with enthusiasm by the workers, who showed low absenteeism and were enthusiastic about the opportunity and the chance to learn new skills. These skills were put to use as on the 21st of January 1981, the first car rolled off the production line within the 18 months promised. It looked good. It looked futuristic. It looked like Johnny DeLorean had got his wish and was ready to take on the world.
Well, here it is, unquestionably the most talked about car here at Motor Fair. The car in which all of us as British taxpayers own a slice to the tune of £77 million, the DeLorean. And with me here, Mr. John DeLorean. Mr. DeLorean, they tell me that you're the best salesman in the world. If I came to you, how would you sell me one of your cars?
Well, I think, number one, the allegation that I'm a great salesman is a gross exaggeration. Essentially, I'm an engineer, and I like a product, I like technical things. Very proud of our car, which essentially I think is a major engineering contribution to the state-of-the-art of automobiles.
However, something was wrong. The car wasn't very good. Let's start with the stainless steel body. In the press photos on cutlery, stainless steel looks good. However, once it's been driven a few hundred miles and hasn't been polished for a while, not so much. Imagine driving around in a mirror where every fingerprint and bit of dust and dirt leaves an impression. The general handling of the car, despite Colin Chapman's input, left a lot to be desired. The steel chassis added a lot of weight to the car, adding in the rear engine design left a 35-65 weight distribution. With the weight of the car, the PRV engine was always fighting a losing battle. Automotive magazines decided to test the car to see if the brochure figures were the same as IRL. The test found a 0-60 time of around 10 seconds. This is significantly slower than its rivals such as the contemporary Porsche 911 SC, which did it in 6 seconds. Now, the obvious solution to low engine performance would be to fit a turbocharger. It was hoped this would help the car be comparable to other sports cars of the time. Unfortunately, this wouldn't be ready until 1984. The gull-wing doors, again aesthetically, looked the business, but due to poor electrics, often found themselves trapping their owners, including once DeLorean himself, in the car. The car would reportedly not work in cold conditions, which could lead to a delayed throttle until warm enough. Due to the workforce inexperience, both on the shop floor and by all accounts in management too, the first cars off the production line were that poor quality they would be shipped to America and essentially reconstructed before being handed to their owners. At a cost of roughly $1,500 per vehicle, thus wiping out the cost savings of using cheap Northern Irish labour. In fairness, quality issues are expected for first edition cars, even today. As production continued, many issues were fixed, but a poor first impression does not complement arguably the biggest issue, the price. The DMC-12 was called that because it is expected to retail for $12,000. When the car was in showrooms, the listed price was around $25,000. This was comparable to the Porsche 911 of the time and 10 grand more than GM's contemporary Chevrolet Corvette. However, despite the cost, the DMC-12 were selling. A total of 9,000 were sold across its lifetime. A lot of these were likely pre-orders before the news of the car's limitations got out. But despite everything, the car arguably was priced too cheap. Prices were increased to just under 30 grand in 1982. Given the car had come out at double the estimated RRP and was still too cheap, you wouldn't be surprised to hear costs across the business were running away from DeLorean. There was an estimated $10 million black hole in the business. DMC was in dire financial trouble. John went back to the British government to ask for more money. Now, just take a moment to think which is the last person in human history you'd like to receive that request for more money for your failing state-funded project in 1980s Britain. That's right, it landed on the desk of Mrs. Thatcher. The answer was no. Mr. DeLorean at this point was still earning his self-appointed $500,000 yearly salary with expenses, reportedly invested very little of his own money in the project, and said to DMZ executives, "I don't think we'll ever build the car in Northern Ireland. The IRA will blow it up." Sales slowed due to poor PR. Despite this, John actually hired new staff and ramped up production to look more enticing to investors, who never came. Ironically, the investment from the British government was a sign that the economy of Northern Ireland was a failure. With the vultures hovering, DeLorean was desperate to keep the business going. He knew the upgrades were incoming and that eventually the 1981-82 US recession, which was partly to blame for the slow sales, would end. Available shift for workers diminished until they ended up on one-day work weeks before the inevitable. On May 31st, 1982, the Dunmurry factory was closed for what would be the last time. The business was effectively in a coma on life support. John needed a lot of money, fast. Thankfully in the 1980s, there was another business he could get involved with to help. So here's the setup. Ronald Reagan, the actor, was president at this point. He famously introduced the war on drugs, where harsh prison sentences were given to those involved in the dealing of narcotics. However, if found guilty, you could reduce your sentence by snitching on someone more noteworthy than yourself. One of DeLorean's neighbours was a guy named James Timothy Hoffman. Hoffman had previously worked as a drug smuggler between Colombia and the USA. He was facing a long prison sentence until he read the New York Journal covering John's financial woes, which gave him an idea. Hoffman reportedly told DEA agent Gerald Scotty, "You know I'm going to get John DeLorean for you guys." He delivered on his promise. There are differing reports about whether Hoffman or DeLorean broke the ice regarding the deal, but eventually both agreed to the following. DeLorean would pay $2 million to fund the purchase of cocaine, but could be expected to make $60 million from the sale. DeLorean had tried to pull out of the deal, because when you're the head of your own failing car company, you don't have $2 million in cash lying around. The deal was then changed to where John instead put forward $2 million worth of assets as collateral. This included several sports cars in his possession, as well as the entire voting stock of DMC. With the finance of the deal agreed, DeLorean drove to the Sheraton Hotel near LAX to complete the transaction, unaware the room had been thoroughly booked audibly and visually. He's seen clearly opening the suitcase, commenting on the goods before raising a glass of champagne and a toast to his future, which was looking bright for about 10 minutes.
Better gold. Gold weighs more than that, for God's sakes.
Once he had enough time to fully incriminate himself, FBI agents revealed themselves and arrested DeLorean on the spot. John was in deep trouble. There was no doubt he had done it. It was on tape, and due to a deal done by CBS to broadcast the footage, had been seen by many potential jurors. However, a man of his stature obviously had a great legal team, led by lawyer to the stars, Howard Weissman. A man who would later be part of the team that got DeLorean's mate OJ acquitted, he had a real-life get-out-of-jail-free card. Within law, there is a concept known as entrapment. This is defined as a doctrine under which the defendant, although in fact guilty of the crime for which an indictment has been secured, nevertheless seeks acquittal on the theory that the police have induced the commission of a crime that would not have been committed otherwise. Essentially, law enforcement cannot charge someone for a crime if they knowingly put them in that position. Yes, the person did commit a crime, but if the law enforcement went out their way to make it happen, or knowingly took advantage of vulnerabilities, this can often get quashed in court. Given DMC was on the brink of collapse, the FBI changed the deal when he didn't have the cash, and the reports Hoffman threatened his daughter if he pulled out, John could easily argue he was in a vulnerable position. This led to the jurors easily acquitting DeLorean. He was a free man, but he knew he was finished. Walking out as a free man, he rhetorically asked reporters,
Life as a hard-working industrialist has been tattered and torn. I don't know, would you buy a used car from me?
However, this wasn't the only legal issue hanging over John's head. Whilst digging through DMC finances, Receiver found an abnormality. The design work by Lotus appeared to have been paid for twice. The first payment covered the cost of the engineering. The suspicious incident involved $17.65 million being sent to an offshore company based in Panama but had a Geneva address known as GPD. This was a company created in the 1960s by Chapman and Lotus financial director Fred Bushell. Chapman had repeatedly asked the British government for some assistance due to Lotus taking a turn for the worse. A request for $400,000 was rejected. Shortly after, they gave DeLorean £35 million. If DeLorean wanted the work completed quickly to meet the promised deadlines, he needed it to be a good deal for Chapman, and if he could stick one to the British government at the same time, even better. So by sending the profits of the job through GPD, Chapman could avoid paying tax, as corporation tax was only paid on profits. Critically, the GPD contract was signed by DeLorean, Chapman and Bushell. This meant all three were liable for fraud charges. Bushell was sentenced to 3 years in prison, which was extended to 4 years when he was unable to pay the fines and legal fees associated with the case. Chapman would have also faced around 10 years jail time had he not suspiciously died of a heart attack in 1982. By this time, John had left the British Isles behind long ago and would not be extradited by the US government. So the dream was over for DeLorean. But you may have noticed I haven't mentioned the most famous DeLorean car yet. Let's go back a few years. 1980 Hollywood. Robert Zemeckis and Bob Gale are trying to get a film off the ground. They had collaborated on several projects up to this point, but none have been the success they had hoped for. It was during this time they created the script for what would eventually become Back to the Future, a sci-fi comedy about teenager Marty McFly using a time machine built by scientist Doc Brown to go back to 1955. The film required a channel for the role of Time Machine. Originally, Rob and Bob thought about using a fridge before raising concerns children would imitate by climbing inside and getting themselves stuck. They concluded it would be a great idea if the time machine was mobile, i.e. in a vehicle. Whilst brainstorming, in August 1984, a nearby TV was covering John's trial. The DeLorean was chosen as they thought someone in 1955 would mistake the shape, body and doors to be a UFO.
It's a flying saucer from outer space!
Also, due to the movie being comedic, they needed a car which, in 1985, was a joke.
Wait a minute, Doc. Are you telling me that you built a time machine out of a DeLorean?
The way I see it, if you're gonna build a time machine into a car, why not do it with some style?
The car will be featured in the 1985 movie as well as its subsequent sequels released in 1989 and 1990. The prominence of the DMC with the flux capacitor accessory led to a renaissance of its image. The car became a pop culture icon, being seen in media from music videos to video games. Your view on DeLorean very much depends on your age. The movies are possibly one of the best cut-off points. Those born before 1970 see him as a drug smuggler who took on GM and ultimately failed.
So he was sort of a hero of mine. And then when he was going to start his own car company, he was like, he's sticking it into GM, he's the rebel, all that kind of 60s stuff. And then, of course, he just turned out to be another sleazy coke dealer,
Those born after see him as the man who made the cool car from the movie. The car did a full 180 in reputation. Suddenly, it was the icon it was destined to be in pre-production. After the movie's success, Zemeckis and Gale reportedly received a thank you letter from John DeLorean himself. Despite becoming a Hollywood star, things were still not looking good for John. Despite winning the entrapment case, the FBI were not the only ones after him. It is believed he had around 40 cases brought against him in total. The cost of these soon turned into debt. In 1999, John DeLorean declared personal bankruptcy. As part of the foreclosure, his assets were seized. This included his estate in New Jersey, which was sold to Donald Trump. He turned it into the Trump National Golf Club, Bedminster. Following Chapman's death and the DeLorean affair, Lotus also encountered financial difficulties after a stellar 1960s and 70s. The company was saved in 1988 after it was purchased by General Motors. Following the collapse of DMC, John went through some strange phases. He divorced from Cristina Ferreira in 1985.
Is there one thing that stands out that hurt the most?
Oh yeah, losing my family was the most difficult thing.
Christina Ferrari, John DeLorean's third wife, left him shortly after his acquittal of criminal charges in connection with the now-defunct DeLorean Motor Company.
Curled in a difficult spot requiring soul-searching, he spent time with Charles Colson, famously special counsel to President Richard Nixon during Watergate. Through his time with Colson, he became a born-again Christian.
Potential DeLoreans out there who face as much trouble as you?
Well, maybe not as much trouble, but it's certainly, you know, the Bible classifies pride as the deadliest sin, and it is, because countries have been destroyed, businesses, institutions. The other vices, lust is usually involves two people, and murder maybe two or three, but pride normally is the thing that destroys nations.
Yeah. You made one or two references to the Bible. I think everybody must know that you have had would born again be the right phrase, or a Christian conversion?
Yeah, born again is the right phrase.
Were you?
To this day, citizens of Belfast are proud of the car and even its failure, which is a stain on the unpopular Thatcher government. Exploring the city, you will still find references in street art, tourist advertisements, and in some souvenirs. If you go to Belfast expecting to see much of the old site, you may be slightly disappointed. The site has been incorporated into a larger industrial estate, which is private land and off limits to public without a permit. If you view the site in Google Maps, you will find traces of the old DeLorean test track still in place. Again, unfortunately, the site is private property, and to get a chance of a view would involve trekking along a dangerous road not meant for pedestrians. The old TT has occasionally been reopened for reunion events, which occasionally take place where enthusiasts bring their DMC-12s back home to Belfast. Despite the collapse of DMC, enthusiasts remained dedicated to the DeLorean. In 1995, Stephen Wynn, a Texas businessman, founded DeLorean Motor Company and purchased remaining parts that were still available. He now acts as a central point for any DeLorean used sales, as well as stocking spares in order to keep the estimated 6,500 remaining DMC-12s running well beyond Back to the Future 2's 2015 setting. In 2022, a new car using the DeLorean name was announced, the electric Alpha 5. Like its grandfather, the Alpha 5 was drawn up by Ital Designs, has a shining stainless steel body, gull-wing doors, and an appearance like it came out of a sci-fi film. With estimated performance of 0 to 60 in just under 3 seconds, a top speed of 155 miles an hour and a range of 300 miles, the car is projected to begin production in late 2024. Given the speed I edit these videos, that would likely have been 2 years ago, so I've put actual results on screen. John continued to be in the public eye, often being seen giving speeches and discussing his life. In 2005, at the age of 80, John Zachary DeLorean died in hospital in New Jersey from a stroke, still with a UK arrest warrant hanging over his head. He was buried in a motorbiker's jacket and jeans, with his final resting place being in Troy, Michigan, some 20 miles from Detroit Center. His tombstone reads his name and is accompanied with a picture of his beloved DMC-12. Although a controversial figure, I believe he was a success. He could have been one of the many who held presidential or CEO positions at General Motors, but he chose his own path. He created a legacy which meant he was more than just a name on a tombstone. He had written his own story.
If the DeLorean hadn't existed, Tom Clancy would have had to invent it. This wasn't really a car. It was part of a bigger storyline that involved the British government, the feds, and a silver-haired anti-hero with some extremely odd ideas. The DeLorean itself was perhaps his oddest idea of all. An unpainted stainless steel sports car with gull-wing doors and, thanks to a wheezing 130 horsepower Renault engine hanging off the back, almost no performance whatsoever. The DeLorean quickly developed a terrible reputation, and that only got worse when famous American owners got locked inside by the failing electrics. It was a disaster, and production ended before Steven Spielberg made it a time-traveling film star. If you want one now, there's a man in America who can build you a new DeLorean from old parts. But he won't be the real deal until he gets on the FBI Most Wanted list.
Stand up.